everybody, and welcome to Hey Coach Tony. I am Tony Fiorino, and it is Saturday, June 25th. As you know, each week on Hey Coach Tony, we discuss the hottest topics affecting parents and coaches of young athletes, and we open up the studio lines so that you can chime in and let us know what you think. The number here in the studio is 855-HEY-COACH. That's 855-439-2622. I'm going to apologize in advance this morning for my voice. I have been sick as a dog. I am coughing up all kinds of oddly shaped, oddly colored, let's just call them items. And hopefully I don't hack up anything on the mic here, but I will be using the cough button a lot today. Also, don't want to forget that even though last week I wished my son TJ a happy 14th birthday, today is the 25th, and it is actually his birthday today. So while we had family over last week, today's his actual birthday, and he's going to celebrate by playing in his town's all-star game, and then he's going to be heading with me with Team New York over to a tournament in Briarcliff Manor in Westchester. So happy birthday, TJ. Very proud of the young man that you're turning into. And getting back to business, as usual, folks, there was no shortage of news in youth sports this past week, and in fact, there was a very disturbing article that originated not far from the tiny little town where I grew up on Long Island. On Monday in East Meadow, New York, a woman named Janet Chiauzzi was facing charges for allegedly launching a hate campaign against a youth baseball coach, the likes of which I have never heard before. The details of this case and the actual threats that she made are more than a little disturbing. And all of this, why? Because her 11-year-old son wasn't chosen for the town's travel baseball team. I got to tell you, the lengths to which parents will go is really becoming quite ridiculous. And just when you think it can't get any worse, along comes this lady, and I'm going to use the term lady loosely, who gives a whole new meaning to over-the-top sports mom. Well, we're going to get to that later on in the show, because first, I want to address an issue that's been plaguing youth sports for as long as youth sports have been around. We've all been at games or practices and heard people say things like, wow, that kid's a natural, or, she must have been born with something special, or great athletes are born, not made. Well, these statements have all become cliches, and they've become cliches for a good reason. That reason is this: no one has ever figured out whether or not it's true. Well, that is up until now. Would you believe that you can actually take a DNA test for your child, and the results may perhaps unlock the great mystery of whether great athletes are born or made? Now, I personally find this topic fascinating because there seem to be as many people arguing either side of this case. Well, today we're going to get some answers because there is a series of companies, one of which is called Atlas Sports Genetics, and they have conducted these tests in the past for parents all around the country, all around the world. In fact, when I first decided to do a show on this, I went researching on the topic, and I found some articles, so I decided to track down a gentleman by the name of Kevin Reilly. Kevin was the president of Atlas Sports Genetics. He is currently the president of a company called Epic Athletic Performance. I don't know if that means he's no longer the president of Atlas Sports Genetics, but it was a real challenge tracking him down. So after some hard work, I was able to find him, and I'm happy to say that he is going to be joining me on the show this morning. Now, I know you're going to have some questions for him, so we have already opened up the studio lines because I want to know what you think. Again, we're talking about whether athletes are born or made. Is it vice versa? Anyway, we've opened up the studio lines at 855-HEY-COACH. That's 855-439-2622. And before we start taking your calls, I first want to welcome to the show Kevin Reilly of Epic Athletic Performance. Kevin, thanks for joining me this morning, and welcome to Hey Coach Tony. How you doing this morning?
Hey, it's good to be with you, Tony.
Well, first things first, I stumbled through your background a little bit because I first found you as the president of Atlas Sports Genetics. I know that you are now the president of Epic Athletic Performance. Is there any relationship between these companies? Are you no longer working with Atlas Sports Genetics? Why don't you walk us through your background?
Well, as far as my background, I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist and was an Olympic weightlifting coach for 10 years. And we got involved with one of the gentlemen that was at one of the large and successful Division I colleges here in the United States that went on to develop a program where they had 25 national championships. And we got involved in the talent identification side of this, primarily with somewhat older athletes, as far as, primarily in probably age 13 to 18, in these tests and standards that were used at the college level to determine athletic ability. My involvement in Atlas, and we're doing very little work with Atlas at this point in time, and I'll explain that in a little bit, was still this question that loomed of, is there anything that you could do to identify talent with real young kids, meaning probably under age 8? The problem with doing a lot of the tests that we currently do, they're more performance-based tests, and kids that are under age 8 really lack the motor skills to do well on a lot of these performance tests. Mm-hmm. And there was a company out of Australia that had a new test that identified one single marker, as far as a genetic marker, that had to do with power sports. Mm-hmm. And we were interested in that because we were getting interest in some younger kids, and just to want to see if there was any efficacy of applying that test for these younger athletes.
All right, so this whole idea of the genetics relating to potential prowess or prodigy of a young athlete, that's something that we were all toying around with, I guess, going back a couple of years ago. Needless to say, there are countries who pride themselves on identifying athletes at a very, very young age, and they adopt a, feed the eagles, starve the turkeys mentality. A lot of the communist countries were doing it for a long time back in the day. So this whole thing of Atlas Sports Genetics identifying traits in very young kids, was that just a complete flop?
Well, it's not so much that it's a flop. The problem with genetic sports testing at this point in time, it's just way too early in the process. I think 10 or 15 years from now, the science will be much better in terms of the number of markers that are out there that can give us the information that will be helpful regarding talent.
Okay. Well, I personally was all geared up to try to shred a lot of this DNA stuff because, you know what, we've all seen kids who are, quote, born with it. But I got to tell you, I've seen just as many kids who at age 8 or 9, you would think, hey, kid, you know what? Put the ball away and get your hands on a book because that's your future. And they turn out to be pretty accomplished young athletes because they have factors that aren't going to show up on a DNA test, like determination and drive and perseverance and an ability to learn. And so I was really looking to shred you this morning. I'm not going to lie to you, Kevin, but you know what? Kevin sent me an email last night outlining some pretty cool stuff that he's doing with Epic Athletic Performance. That does not mean that we're not going to take your calls on this whole concept of genetics and the role that they play, because Kevin does have some very specific knowledge and experience in that area. But just to make sure that our listeners know, Kevin, are you a genetic scientist? Do you have any of that in your background at all?
No, I'm not.
So just before we move off of Atlas, as the president of that company, how was the testing done and what was the role of Atlas? In other words, were they selling snake? I mean, listen, if you can't talk about some of this, I get it. But was this kind of a snake oil thing where people were selling the dream to parents to say, hey, we can tell you if your kid's the next Tiger Woods?
No, and I'm not involved in with that company at this point in time, but it was primarily geared towards against some older athletes, and the information can be beneficial more in terms of making determinations on the type of training program an athlete will benefit from. Again, if an athlete is destined to be a power athlete for power sports, you're going to want to train that athlete that way. If they're more destined to be an endurance athlete, then that type of training. Unfortunately, a lot of the training programs that are out right now treat all athletes the same way as far as in a team mentality for development, and that can cause some problems.
Okay.
There's talent identification and development, and it's more the development side that where the problems can lie.
Well, question that I have. Let's assume for a second, regardless of when the test is taken or performed, do these tests say that a person who tests a certain way, let's say power versus endurance, can't completely defy the data and still excel? In other words, if I test poorly for endurance, does that mean that I cannot go become a world-class marathon runner? And conversely, if I test poorly for power, does that mean I can't go on and play in the NFL?
Well, that was one of the problems that we did. We actually did a study ourselves where we took some of the elite Olympic weightlifters, both men and women, and tested them out. And again, with that sport, you would think that all these athletes would be speed power genetic profiles. Now, actually, what we found, a girl who was a very accomplished lifter who had an endurance profile. But when you talk to the coaches, what they were saying was, well, this is interesting because she's what they call the ever-ready bunny. She was the type that could just go and go and go as far as the volume of work that she was doing. So again, it gets back to more in terms of how it'll affect the training process than it can or can't do a certain sport.
See, that's interesting to me because a lot, and you know this, a lot of the articles that were written about this whole concept of genetic testing, whether it's the idiot doctors or the idiot sales guys or the idiot reporters, there has certainly been a decent amount of snake oil, and the articles are always entitled something like, DNA test can tell whether or not your kid will be a star. That's just not true. What you're saying is the genetic makeup of your kid can and may determine the best course of training that will be most efficient and effective for your kid. Is that a safe way to describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, that's where we've really found the benefit for the genetic testing. Again, the key is, and I don't want to dismiss as far as the genetic testing, even with young kids, but down the road, we're going to find markers such as height characteristics, the ability of putting on the amount of muscle mass an athlete will be able to achieve, and also the predisposition for certain injuries. I think once those markers are found, that's going to be some beneficial information.
How far you think we are from stuff like that? Because I got to tell you, I have one daughter who has just miserable knee problems between her growth and tendinitis, and my little one, she could just, jump around all day long and never complains about pain. How far are we from something like that happening?
Oh, I think you're going to see an explosion probably in the next 10 years regarding a number of those characteristics. And again, it does because probably the area for parents and young athletes as far as the vulnerability is the amount of overtraining and over-participation in that gets them in problems.
Well, there's no question about that. Overuse and burnout is clearly an issue here. And by the way, when we get back from break, we're going to talk a little bit about how some of these genetic tests and genetic predispositions can actually contribute to more burnout than more actual success. So, you know what, when we come back, we'll be taking your calls. If you think testing your kid's DNA to tell if they're going to be a top athlete is good or bad, I'll tell you what, you think it's even possible, give us a call here at 855-HEY-COACH. That's 855-439-2622. But before we go to break, folks,
Coach Tony.
Hey, welcome back, folks. You're listening to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio. I am joined this morning by Kevin Reilly, who is the president of Epic Athletic Performance, former president of Atlas Sports Genetics. And we're talking this morning about whether great athletes are born or made. There are indeed tests that you can perform on your kid at as early an age as you see fit. And there are people that will tell you that the results of this test are an indication of the athletic prowess or lack thereof that your kid can expect to enjoy throughout their career. Kevin has since moved away from the pure genetics-based research and into actual performance testing and using genetics to amplify and enhance your training regimen. And I think that's great. One thing I wanted to ask you, Kevin, before we move on, it's important for folks to know that parents can still, there are companies that still do these tests, and parents can still decide to take their kids straight out of the womb, stick a Q-tip in their mouth, and send their DNA off to one of these companies and decide to direct the life of their young kid based on the results. Is that right?
Well, I think, from what I know, I think there are some other companies that have come along since I was involved in. I don't know whether they're doing it or not. I will tell you, just based on our experience, it's an absolute waste of money if you're trying to test out kids probably under age 12 with any type of genetic marker for sports performance, because it's going to yield no results. I mean, kids are kids, and they should be out playing and having fun, and not getting into that route of testing to determine those markers.
Your personal opinion, you talk about kids and just letting them go out there and play. Again, it's important that these genetic predispositions are not what they sound like. If a kid just happens to, let's say, what they love to do when they go outside is to just run and run and run and be that Energizer bunny, they may not test to be the ideal marathon runner, but if that's what they spend their childhood doing and they fall in love with it, that's what they can become. So parents who are, breaking out the Q-tips and chasing your kids around the living room trying to get a sample of their saliva, you need to pull back the reins a little bit and let the professionals do what they're doing. Now, Kevin, I did have a question for you, and you kind of alluded to it before the break, but I want you to clarify. Is there any real-world evidence to support this? And I mean support even the more dramatic thinking of you're born to be a high jumper. I mean, have you guys decided to go to professional athletes and kind of retrofit this test to see how they might fare if they had taken this test as a kid? In other words, guidance counselors decide to tell, my son that he's going to be an auto mechanic and your son is going to be a nuclear physicist. Have you done any of that retrofitting to see if any of that stuff was actually true, or did any of these other companies do such research?
Well, when we first looked at this, I mean, there are a number of university double-blind studies that were done, and one of the best studies came about from Australia, where they looked at Olympic-level sprinters. And what they found is, with this one marker that we were doing, that 100% of the female Olympic sprinters had this marker to indicate that they were a speed power athlete. But again, it's one Olympic level athletes, and then making that far stretch to say, well, can we do this broad sweep with one single test to find out whether a young kid is going to be an Olympic level athlete? And the answer to that is absolutely no. If anything, genetics testing right now probably has less than 1% of athletic ability that you're going to want to take a look at. There's other markers that are out there as far as physical markers, performance, that are much easier and much better predictors of athletic talent.
Okay. Now, one of the things that you're doing at Epic Athletic Performance, and I find it kind of fascinating, and maybe you can walk us through some of this, the way you're evaluating athletes and I guess trying to identify some of their potential future success is a lot different than contemporary thinking. I mean, from what I read, you guys take the athlete's body weight, and this testing system you have called the Epic Index focuses on 3 primary tests. One is a 10-yard sprint, and I don't know why a 10-yard sprint is better than a 40-yard sprint, which is what we all hear about. Something called a pro agility run, and then there is this vertical jump. Walk us through real quickly what these indicators predict and project for a young athlete. And for me personally, you got to sell me on why a 10-yard sprint's better than a 40-yard.
Well, starting first with that 10-yard, I mean, the studies that we use as far as the database is based on over 25,000 athletes at a collegiate level to take a look in terms of those common characteristics that chip athletes will have. And when they did the comparison with the results of a 10-yard sprint versus a 40-yard sprint, there was no benefit gained in terms of having an athlete do a 40-yard sprint. The 40-yard sprint has become the gold standard that the NFL primarily has used at the combine testing to determine. The problem with speed power sports, most sport activities are over by the time you hit that 10-yard mark. I mean, if you're in a defensive mode, you're chasing an athlete at that point in time. You want to find out who the most explosive athlete will be, and finding that the 10-yard dash is much safer to do than the 40-yard dash. You're not going to be pulling hamstrings that you often do in kind of a combine event.
Okay, but you know what? I don't know, because I don't think it's as great an indicator, and we can debate this, but we won't. I happen to watch a lot of football, and I know that in a 10-yard span, there are guys who weigh over 300 pounds that are, literally nanoseconds away from the fastest running back in 10 yards. These guys have real strong bursts of speed. Maybe football's the anomaly here?
Well, even going to see the NFL, and we provided one of the timers at the combine this year, and even the NFL combine, I think, is going to start to look in terms when they evaluate these big linemen of not having them do 40-yard dashes, that they're going to cut the distance down eventually to probably a 10 or a 20-yard dash.
Okay, 20 you could probably sell me on, but you know what? You're picking on this NFL combine. I love my football. I love my Steelers. What else is wrong with the NFL combine? That can't be all you guys think is wrong with the combine.
Well, not necessarily. The problem, and we saw this at the university level as well, more information is not necessarily better information when it comes to evaluating the talent of speed power athletes. The problem we see in a lot of combine events is they're gathering repetitive information. The best predictor of athletic talent for speed power sports is the vertical jump. The science backs that up, as well as repeated studies. I mean, when we talked a few moments ago as far as the genetic potential, the vertical jump is the one that you're going to find out whether kids are just born with that natural explosive talent or not. It's training somewhat, but it's something the kids either have or that they don't have.
Okay. Well, that seems to make sense. Can you really predict who's going to be a scholar? Because here's where we start getting back to some of the genetic stuff and predicting the future. Can you really go predict? I mean, the holy grail for parents is my kid going to get a scholarship? I think it's pretty stupid, but can you really predict who's going to be a scholarship level athlete?
Well, we've gotten very good. In fact, there's one of the companies that's right in your area for listeners. It's called Athletic Standards, that's doing exactly that. They're taking these test principles, and they're getting very good of identifying those kids that have that natural ability for speed power sports, putting it in a very simple formula, similar to how a decathlon point system. Coaches can evaluate that and then use that information along with game films and other information to really determine the ones that they want to take that gamble or bet on that's going to be a good performing athlete over a career of 4 years in college.
Okay. Well, I would love to get some more data on that, because I think if you, in any way, you want to go become the multi-gazillionaire, if you can in any way link the swabbing of a kid's inner cheek to whether or not they're going to be a scholarship level athlete. And I know I'm connecting a lot of dots that I shouldn't be connecting here, Kevin, but if you guys can pull that off, you are the Pied Pipers, and there will be idiots following you in droves over whatever cliff you guys choose to bring them. And I don't mean to keep drawing that parallel. Kevin, I want you to stick around. I've noticed we're having some phone line trouble with you, and you're dropping off, so our guy's going to try to fix that. And when we come back, there's an email that we got from a guy named Joey Bag of Baseballs, who brings up something I had almost completely forgotten about when it comes to genetics and athletic performance. You're not going to want to miss this. Any of you Jimmy the Greek fans, if you got that good a memory, when we come back, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite stories in sports. But listen, before we go to break, you know what? If you think you got what it takes to go toe-to-toe with me here in the studio, if you know a terrific coach or administrator who might be a good guest on the show, let me know about it. I've really enjoyed the guests that I've had so far, and I really like the idea of inviting new guests along. So if you know, or if you are a great coach or administrator, shoot me an email at heycoachtony@gmail.com, or call me on the Hey Coach Tony hotline after the show at 855-HEY-COACH. That's 855-439-2622. If I pick you to be on the show, you're going to get a Hey Coach Tony t-shirt or a Hey Coach Tony coffee mug like this one that I finally found. The shirts and the mugs are courtesy of Signature Marketing of Connecticut. Call my friend Jennifer Holguin at Signature Marketing at 203-232-0868, and she'll help you design the perfect promotional products for your company or your organization. Call Signature Marketing at 203-232-0868, or visit them on the web at signaturemarketing.com. And remember, if someone could be a great guest, shoot me a note, give me a call. Either way, you're listening to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio.
Coach Tony.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio this lovely Saturday morning. And as I had alluded to before we went, by the way, if anybody has the hotline to Crayola, please email me that number, because I coughed something up during the break, and it's a brand new color. Never seen it before. So, Crayola, if you're listening, I got a patent pending on this new color. Anyway, I appreciate you dealing with me coughing into the mic this morning. Before we went to break, I had mentioned that a longtime friend of the show, Joey Bag of Baseballs, wrote in, and I got to read this email. Kevin Reilly, I'm going to ask you to give me your opinion on this as well. He goes, hey, Coach Tony, to think, in all this talk about genetics, that they fired Jimmy the Greek for basically saying the same things about 30 years ago, and now there's a test for it. Good looks are genetic. Look at the mother, and you can tell what the daughter is going to turn out looking like most of the time. The Marge Simpsons of the world rarely give birth to beauty queens. Understanding that looks are subjective and athletics can be measured, i.e. your time in the 40 or in or in Kevin's case, your time in the 10. I believe that certain things are God-given, but I wouldn't put too much faith in a genetic test to determine who the gifted athletes are. A less gifted individual can work really hard to become a better athlete and close the gap. But if the gifted person has the same drive and desire, it's not much of a race. Well, a lot of good points in there, Joey. Great point on the Jimmy the Greek thing. I don't know if any of you guys remember who Jimmy the Greek was or how his story is pertinent here, but allow me to elaborate, because this information that we're discussing here is indeed something Jimmy the Greek knew very, very well. Now, it's important to note Jimmy the Greek was not a genetic scientist. He wasn't even a doctor. Jimmy the Greek was basically a gambler, a handicapper, a professional handicapper. He was so good at it that he got a job as a TV analyst, and he was one of the most famous and recognized sports journalists in the world at that time. Well, anyway, beloved Jimmy got fired one day. And you want to know why? Because he told the truth. Kevin, you remember the story?
I do.
All right, let me finish this because I'm going to get your opinion on it. So I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Somebody had basically asked him in a public place, I think he was sitting at a restaurant, someone had asked him why black athletes were dominating sports. And again, I'm shortcutting this, so please don't call me up, ACLU or anybody else. Now, while this may or may not be able to be proven, he basically responded to this question by saying that, in essence, rich white landowners and slave owners would take their biggest, strongest slaves and, for lack of a better term, breed them or mate them. Now, it sounds harsh the way I'm saying it, but think about it. It makes sense, doesn't it? Not the slavery part. Please don't think that. Not the slavery part, all right? But the idea of taking your strongest males and breeding them with your strongest females. The idea was to create this these super slaves, and that's in essence what happened. Well, the genetic traits that made a human bigger and stronger were obviously going to become more prevalent in the slave population. Well, the good news is that slavery ended, and the genetic altering that took place in certain degrees continued forward. Now, what I didn't mention is that Jimmy the Greek said this stuff back in I guess it was the late 80s, and the networks back then didn't smile on the way that sounded, so they fired him. But anyway, the point is this. We do know there are certain characteristics and genetic traits that are more amenable to athletic prowess. Anybody who denies that is really kind of stupid. Nobody's going to deny that. The question remains, do you need that genetic predisposition, or is it just nice to have, and does it give you a leg up on the competition? Kevin, I didn't read this story to make you uncomfortable as a first-time guest on the show, but what's your opinion on this parallel that I'm drawing on the story of this, what I'll call the first genetics experiment in sports history in America?
Well, what I do agree with, I do think that genetics does play a role. Again, as we talked about, I think it's a minor role as far as talent identification. What I don't agree with the Jimmy the Greek thing is that it's necessarily race-related, because we see in Olympic sports, as far as a number of similar characteristics across the spectrum as far as on race characteristics. So to try to link it with race. Like I said, it's a genetic issue, which is, to a degree, colorblind.
I'd say it's completely colorblind. I think the only parallel, the only connection between race and genetics here is that, unfortunately, black people were slaves. I mean, if for some reason Italians were shipped over from Italy and thrown into slavery and the same thing happened, I don't know if you agree or disagree, my thought is the same exact thing would have happened. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with the genetic makeup. And like I said, these slave owners, and I don't want to get into this whole Civil War thing, but the idea was, regardless of what color the slaves were, their thought was take the biggest and the strongest, breed them, and you have, in essence, these super slaves. So I think it actually proves what you're saying, which is the genetics is what carries it forward. And if you replicate those genetic traits, you're going to get some above average or superior athletes. Is that safe to say?
Like I said, I think that's so much off of kind of what we focus on. I mean, I really wouldn't have a comment on something like that.
That's okay. I make my living being a little edgy. So do me a favor. Tell me this. When all's said and done, Kevin, what's the real purpose of this, just to make it clear for everybody, what's the real purpose of this test? Who should be using it and why?
Well, the only there's really two markers that I'm aware of at this point in time that for sports. And the one that we're looking at can define certain characteristics for speed power sports versus endurance sport athletes. I think it has a minor role. Again, I mentioned probably 1% of the total overall look as far as talent identification. I think it's entirely inappropriate to do on young kids because it's not going to serve any benefit to a parent. Make certain decisions that they want to do. Remember, only 1% of athletes go on to a career as a varsity athlete in high school, well enough into college and into professional sports. So I think putting all this overemphasis is somewhat ridiculous. Now, it is important to come back a little bit on the other side and talk. It is important to take a look in terms of what the Canadians have identified as this plan of how many years does it take to develop an athlete up to an Olympic level. Well, gymnastics, for example, I mean, you're getting athletes, as we saw in the last Summer Games, medaling at age 16. Well, you can reverse the math going backwards. If that takes 10 years, you're needing to identify some of these athletes around age 6, 7, 8 in order to become Olympic athletes. And that does present some challenges for performance testing.
I couldn't agree more. And by the way, I want to make it very clear, Kevin, that I think you're right on the mark. And like I said, I was hoping to dislike you, and I was hoping to rip you apart with some of this genetic stuff. But you know what? I don't want to get too far off that, because the fact of the matter is there are parents who will use and abuse this stuff. I'd imagine with this capability available to anybody with $150 and a Q-tip, that the peer pressure among parents might take something like this out of control. I mean, as it stands now, parents already get anxiety over how many private lessons the neighbor's kids are going to get. Could you see the same thing happening once the neighbors find out that the Jones kid, got tested for DNA?
Well, it is interesting. Like I said, I was involved with the genetics side for about 2 years. And during that 2-year period of time, we actually saw very few parents older 2-year-old. I know there was a lot of media attention. We did hundreds of interviews and stuff, but the reality is most parents, I think, are pretty good when it comes to common sense and not wanting to go down that route of that over-enthusiasm.
Well, and I think, the stories that were glorified, and by the way, folks, we're aware that we're having some drop-offs in the phone line, and we're working on those. The ones that get all the attention are the idiot moms who, I believe, there was one quoted you were quoted in a New York Times article about 3 years ago, and there was a woman who proudly said, hey, yeah, of course I'm doing it for my young kid, and I want to give her every opportunity and every advantage she can get. That's a genuine Mongo, and I never want to give those people any kind of a limelight. Listen, genetics and heredity certainly play a part. We know that. I still want to look back at passion and commitment. I keep going to the Pete Roses of the world. These are folks who weren't genetically gifted. And quite frankly, when he was scouted, Pete Rose scored basically average across the board on all of his skills evaluations. Yet he became a baseball icon, a legend. I hate to put you on the spot. Actually, I keep saying I hate to put you on the spot, and I keep doing it. So I guess I like putting you on the spot. Let me ask you this. Given a choice as a coach, would you rather have the genetically predisposed kid or the kid who's willing to run through a brick wall and do whatever it takes to succeed?
Well, I'll kind of back up a little bit. I think it's a little bit of both. However, I think we all get enamored, like with the movie Rudy, of thinking somebody that doesn't have a lot of natural or performance ability, and they can compete at an elite level. The reality is, to that answer, it's no. They're not going to have that ability to rise at that level. Now, hard work, as far as kind of running through the wall type of an athlete, I think probably one of the most important things that we cannot test performance or genetic is, and I think we're seeing that with a lot of athletes now in terms of their character when they get up to a college level or a pro level and they're getting into trouble all the time. I think those things do hamper one's athletic career, and I don't know how to test for that.
Well, you know what? Like I said, we start figuring this stuff out. Like, hey, you know what we should be able to test for? Why don't we try to isolate the gene that will decide whether or not my kid's going to solve world hunger or find a cure for cancer? We're glorifying this sports gene, dude. And listen, I think it's important stuff that you're doing. Listen, we have to go to a quick break. And by the way, Kevin, if you can stick around, we're going to finish the show with a segment about this psychotic mom on Long Island who just went through a Bonkerville tour and came out of it smelling like an absolute polished turd. You're not going to want to miss the story. Can you stick around for this story? Because I'd like you to do that
I'm
with
happy
me.
To.
Great. And listen, before I do take off here for this next break, I want to remind you guys, and don't feel too bad, Coach Tony is hitting the road starting this week, so I hope you don't miss me too much. After this week, I'm not going to be back live on the air until, I think it's July 23rd. Next weekend for the 4th of July, I'm going to enjoy some family time, and I'm also going to coach my team, New York baseball guys, in the 4th of July tournament. Then I bring these remarkable young men to Joplin, Missouri, to participate in the Premier World Series. I'm very proud to announce that we are the only team north of the Carolinas and east of the Mississippi who qualified for this tournament. And even more proud to say that while we're there, the young men from Team New York Baseball are going to be donating their time and their effort, whether they like it or not, to assist in the continued recovery efforts in Joplin, Missouri. The people of Joplin are still recovering from one of the worst tornadoes in American history, and they really do need help. So, do what you can. Find out a way to donate and help out here. Anyway, after we win the World Series, TJ and I are going to fly straight to our beautiful girls to join them for vacation. And then, like I said, I'm going to be back with you live on July 23rd. So sit tight, folks. You're listening to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio.
Coach Tony.
Hey, welcome back, folks. You're listening to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio. Joined this morning by Kevin Reilly, Epic Sports Performance President, and he helped us shine some light on some very cool stuff about genetics and predisposition to athletes and their future performance. We're getting to the part in the show here where I gotta rain on somebody. Listen, folks, last week, right after my show, in fact, a woman named Janet Chiauzzi, a 44-year-old mom from East Meadow, Long Island, was arrested after making a series of incredibly stupid mistakes aimed at defaming and disgracing a youth baseball coach and administrator in her town. And why would anyone do such a thing? Well, because he cut her 11-year-old son from the East Meadow travel baseball team. If you know the story or if you got something to say, studio lines are open at 855-HEY-COACH. But according to the authorities, this woman sent several letters to the coach threatening violence against him, his wife, and his children. Police also said that she sent at least 6 letters to East Meadow youth baseball officials demanding that the coach be fired. Even worse, she went as far as sending a letter to the principal of the school where this guy's kids go, claiming he was sexually abusing kids. Now, it's important to note that since allegations of sexual abuse were made, there was indeed an investigation, and as you might have guessed, the result of the investigation was that all those allegations were false. Let me quote something here. This is a warning to you, and then she names the guy, to step down as manager of the 11-year-old travel team and get the hell out of East Meadow baseball altogether. You and your son have no business being associated with the travel team. If the board doesn't pursue any action against you, I'm personally making it my goal to make sure you and your family suffer dearly. You will be rotting in hell soon. I will make it happen. This is one of the letters this psycho broad wrote, and it was read by one of the detectives during a press conference. Now, another letter sent directly to the 11-year-old son of the coach reads in part, tell your stupid father to back away from the East Meadow baseball team or he will be sorry. There are other things in life than baseball, and if he wants to enjoy them, he will get out of East Meadow baseball for good. Accidents happen, and I would hate to see something happen to your mom or dad or sister because of your dad's stupidity. Think about it. If something terrible happens to your dad or mom or sister, you can blame your dad for not taking my threat seriously. He will be harmed, and the outcome will not be good for you. You might never see your dad again. You all better watch your effing backs. This is no joke. This is as real as it gets. Again, the studio lines are open at 855-HEY-COACH. Kevin, what do you think, man?
Well, I mean, what a sad scenario to have. We know from studies that the number one influence that all athletes have on their athletic development is their parents and their parents. And that did get cut. To have parents like that to model after, that's one of the saddest things I can think.
I got to tell you, if you were on the blog at heycoachtony.com and you clicked on the story, you can see this woman, and I got to tell you, you would think, and I don't mean, well, you know what, we're not on in the South. If you saw a picture of this woman, you would think she was some redneck, non-educated broad from way down south somewhere in the middle of nowhere, living in a swamp. She's living on Long Island, New York, man. And by the way, you think the stupid comments end there? Well, guess again. Chiauzzi's attorney, a guy named Peter Bongiorno of Mineola, Long Island, went on the record saying he does not deny his client sent the letters, but insists there's more to the case. You want to hear his quote? She's a wonderful person. The family is wonderful. They've never been in any sort of trouble. They're a hard-working Long Island family just doing a great job raising their kids. Buongiorno, for those of you who don't speak Italian, means good day. It's basically a way of saying hello in Italian. Well, I found myself saying that over and over again when I read this guy's quote. Hello? Are you kidding me? Wonderful person? Really? Doing a great job raising her kids? Really? Sounds more to me like a certifiable psychopath who just ruined, and tell me if you disagree, who just ruined the childhood of her children. Do you think these kids are ever going to be known as anything other than the kid whose mom went nuts and threatened the baseball administration and their family and their children? Listen, if I were a teenage kid who knew this family, I'd be personally having a field day with this one. I mean, remember, guys, and Kevin, you don't know this. I say it all the time on the show. When I was a kid, I was a genuine jerk. I was the kid you don't want your kid to turn out to be like. If I had this kind of, and by the way, there are other kids like that. So if I had this kind of ammunition, I got to tell you, I would be coming up with all kinds of cracks to get all over these kids. I mean, doing a great job raising her kids. I mean, listen, Kevin, you're not a lawyer, are you? You're not a lawyer? Okay, well,
No.
Listen, okay, I know most of you lawyers are morons for the most part, but are you serious? I mean, this thing took on a life of its own, and overall the sentiment has been that this lady is nuts and went dramatically over the line. However, if you care to do research, as I do, you'll always find that one special Mongo out there who decides to step up and defend this woman. I came across something online written by this guy who calls himself JC Sports Fan, and he wrote, I've been a coach and parent of ball players for 16 years, and although she went too far, she was able to make national news. The politics involved in youth sports and how the elite teams are chosen are awful. I have no idea how to fix the issues, but I tell you, I've been in a few heated discussions on both sides of that fence. She's not ruining youth sports, as it's been said, but rather trying to get her kid a fair shake. A bit over the top, but she brought attention to a subject no one really thinks about, unless it's their own kid. Wow, JC, all I can tell you, man, is that could be the dumbest thing I ever read or heard anywhere. You're assuming politics, and not that the kid simply isn't good enough to make that team. Does her kid deserve a fair shake? Sure, but you're assuming they didn't get one. And let's even assume for a second that you're right and the kid didn't get a fair shake. The psycho broad herself didn't even allude at all to politics. But again, let's say that that's the case too. There are always ways to give her kid a fair shake without making psychotic physical threats to him, his wife, and his children. And you go so far, JC, as to describe her as a bit over the top? Are you nuts? Let me ask you this as simply as I can so even an idiot like you can understand it. Is there any reason, and Kevin, I'm going to ask you this one too because I want you to actually say it. Is there any reason ever for a parent to go so far out of her way to make such ridiculous threats regardless of the circumstances?
No, I mean, I think parents have, as much responsibility as the athletes do in terms of conducting themselves that would be honoring to that sport and to the community. And I think somebody like that really kind of, sets the mark for themselves.
I hope that they throw the freaking book at this lady. And by the way, JC, I'm not done with your dopey comments. You say that she's merely bringing attention to something. Well, I agree with you on that one. She is indeed bringing attention to something, but it's not a subject no one wants to think about. She's bringing attention to the notion that there are, walking among us, legitimately insane people out there who will go out of their way to illustrate their lack of sanity when it comes to youth sports. If the police did not step in, this baseball coach could have easily become the next hockey dad from Massachusetts who was beaten to death at a practice by another parent who didn't like the way he was running a scrimmage. He could have become the next high school football coach from Texas who was shot in the chest by the dad of the quarterback who had just been replaced. He could have become the next cheerleader or her mom from Texas who had contracts taken out on their lives by the mother of the girl who missed the very last place on the high school cheerleading squad. He could have become any of a number of people who have been murdered by raging lunatics like this woman who have zero perspective on youth sports. As someone who's coached and parented for 16 years, like you said you have, JC, I can't imagine a more ridiculous set of comments. Maybe it just reads a lot more ridiculous and moronic than you intended, but wow. Let me say this right now, JC. You are in the lead for the Hey Coach Tony 2011 Mongo of the Year award. So, listen up in December because right now you are the runaway favorite for Idiot of the Year on this show. As Kevin said, and that's what this show is really about, folks. As much as I like to have some fun poking people in the nose, what this show is really about is an understanding that of all the influences that will affect your kid throughout their all too brief athletic career, number one on that list is mom and dad. Mom and dad. The parents, by far, in my opinion, have the most dramatic impact on how a kid performs physically and mentally. Second on that list is obviously going to be coach. You're going to be the most impactful source for your kid. You can use that incredibly powerful position to either become an amazingly strong role model and support mechanism, or you can go the route of this incredibly, ridiculously moronic woman, Chiauzzi, out on Long Island, who just made herself famous for being an idiot. Kevin, any other thoughts to add?
No, Tony, I think that's a great summary, and I think, parents need to heed those words that you said and realize, their responsibility on their kids' development.
Quick plug on your company. Where can people reach your company and get more information about what you do?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and go to Epic or our new affiliate that we've got, which is called athleticstandards.com. They're serving some of the parents and kids on the East Coast.
Give me one more plug because you dropped out when you said the website.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's epicathletic.com or athleticstandards.com is serving some of the people on the East Coast.
Well, I got to tell you, Kevin, you've been a great guest here. I really thank you for shining some light on a very controversial topic that's been hitting us for years. You're clearly taking it in a great direction, and I want to thank you for all the great work you do for our kids. Hey, folks, that's going to end another quick hour of my life. I really want to thank you all for the thoughts and the emails and the comments. Like I said, I'm gone for a while. I'm going to be back on July 23rd. In the interim, stay close to the blog at HeyCoachTony.com. I'll see you at the end of July, folks. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.